couple of people have said to me, like, Elwin, why are you ever recommending, pharmaceutical products? They're poisons. And, I do respect that perspective, even though, as I've said many times, I do think the line between supplements, medications, and foods is not 100% clear. There's a lot of overlap in many cases. But I do, respect the perspective in general. And I realize a lot of the time, even if the actual compound in the pharmaceutical is maybe okay-ish. Often there's a bunch of other toxic fillers with it and stuff. But here's the thing. We have to face reality. And so if you're one of those people who never touches any pharmaceutical products and you feel good, congratulations, that's awesome. But it's just not the vast majority of people. And from my experience, it's not even the majority of people who watch podcasts like this and probably this podcast. So that's why I want to give advice for like alternatives to the top prescription and over-the-counter medications that most people, it seems, are taking.
Hello and welcome to the Rejuvenate podcast. I am your host, Chrissy Hawks. And as you were just introduced, that was Elwin Robinson, the creator and founder of Genetic Insights and also the author of the Rejuvenate Blueprint. And in case you missed it, we've done part 1 and this is part 2 of Elwin's top medication choices or things that he would recommend if he was taking them. So if you've missed part 1, click the link that's in one of these corners over here, and that will take you to it. Otherwise, you'll see it in the show notes below. But here we go. We're kicking off part 2. So Elwin, here we go. We're starting off this section, this episode, with proton pump inhibitors. Can you explain to us a little bit about what they are before we get into your recommendations?
Yeah, and just for anyone who hasn't seen the last episode and for some reason doesn't want to, the list is basically based on the, it was really top 10, we've extended it with a couple more of the most already used medications. That's really the point. And so, yeah, proton pump inhibitors, I've heard some people say that it is actually the most prescribed category, at least, of medication. Sorry, not prescribed, bought category of medication, along with other antacids. So proton pump inhibitors, yeah. So this is usually used for acid reflux, GERD, and all the way to, stomach ulcers. And so basically what it is a lot of people might refer to it as an antacid or antacid, colloquially. And so the idea is if you're getting, if you have a stomach ulcer or you think you might have a stomach ulcer, or if you're, I guess, just having reflux, I mean, it's not as serious, but it's still very detrimental, then you're like, okay, stomach acid is burning me. Maybe it's burning a hole in my stomach. Maybe it's burning my throat. Even sinus issues sometimes are rooted in acid and enzymes coming up from the stomach. And so I'm going to suppress my body's stomach acid production. Now, I'd say there's a legitimate use case for this, and then there's the not so legitimate use case. But let's go back a little bit. I've done a full episode on this, so again, we want to make sure we link to people where I did a full episode, or maybe it was a decent chunk of an episode anyway, about the stomach and how a lot of the time things like acid reflux and heartburn, all the things around it, the conventional medical perspective on this is that it's caused by excess stomach acid, and so we just give things that neutralize the stomach acid or reduce the production of the stomach acid. The alternative perspective that you might see a lot, among functional medicine doctors, naturopaths, all those kind of people, is the exact opposite. They say that the problem is actually that the stomach is not producing enough acid, and how could that make sense if the acid is burning you? And how does that make sense if the acid is burning you? And if you feel better when you reduce the stomach acid production, is a fair question to ask. And so the theory is that the problem is that actually there is obviously a valve that should stop that stomach acid coming back up into the esophagus and the throat, but it requires enough and strong enough stomach acid for that valve to work correctly. And so the theory is if you have low stomach acid, then that valve doesn't work correctly. That's why the acid comes back up. That's why you have acid reflux, GERD, heartburn, and all these other kind of related issues. And so it's not only a theory. A lot of practitioners do help people with acid reflux by giving them betaine HCl. And so that is something worth considering. However, where I slightly depart from the alternative perspective that I'd be expected to take is I don't think it is like as simple as that, because a lot of the alternative practitioners, they're like, everyone has low stomach acid, or almost everyone has low stomach acid, and so stress will reduce stomach acid production, and nutritional deficiency will reduce stomach acid production, and a lot of people obviously have both. And of course, as a practitioner, if almost everyone you see is a certain way, it's kind of easy to start thinking that everyone is that way. But I'm not convinced. I do think that there are a decent amount of people, a lot of people who have too little stomach acid and it creates problems. But I also do think that there are some people who produce too much for, various different reasons. We talked last episode about histamine and how, overall, the higher your histamine is, the more stomach acid you'll produce. And there's a medication related to that, which I'll talk about in a second. So it's so true that you can actually modify it significantly with a medication. And so I do think some people are like just very high histamine. Maybe they have more carnivore ancestry, and they just produce a lot of stomach acid. And then if you're putting foods on top of it, especially that like create the production of more stomach acid, carminatives, I believe they're often called, like ginger is a famous one, for instance, like spicy foods. And, if you eat a lot of meat, the more meat you eat, the more stomach acid your body wants to create. Bitter, some of the bitter herbs, like I don't know, maybe you're taking all this stuff because you heard it's good for you from various like naturopaths and herbalists and all the rest of it, but actually, like you're already eating you're already making a bit too much stomach acid, and then like you start eating all this spicy food and taking all these herbs because you heard that they're good for you, and you could just push you over the edge to creating too much stomach acid. So I do think that happens as well. I don't think it's universal, and there's a couple of tests you can do. One of them is to like supplement stomach acid and see what impact that has, and the other one is to supplement sodium bicarb, which is a very strong alkali, and to see what impact that has. And it's not a foolproof test, but it can give an indicator as to which of the two you actually are. Again, for full instructions for that, I won't spend another 5 or 10 minutes on that, but you can see the episode on that. So having given all those caveats, if you maybe I didn't finish the original thought, which is there is a legitimate use case for using a anti-acid, even if you have low stomach acid, and that's if you have a stomach ulcer. So if you have an actual ulcer, this can get so bad that it can start bleeding, it can cause internal bleeding, and you can die. More than one person I'm close to has been in that position, and so I take this very seriously. And this is where I think being a Puritan about medications, I mean, literally, I saw it almost kill someone with this very specific issue. Because they were so against pharmaceutical products. And I was like, look, I get it, but just in this specific case.
Please don't die. Please just don't die. Come on.
It's like confusing orders of thinking. I was just talking about this with a client the other day. I won't give any details. I don't want them to feel bad. But yeah, it's like, sometimes this is like a puritanism about like having to follow a certain path that just, but then it was like, but they were afraid they were going to die. And I'm like, well, like not dying is more important than not taking pharmaceuticals. I think that's as far as I go to say, like that's, in the order of things, that's like, I would prioritize them in that order. That's the legitimate use case, because if you have a stomach ulcer, it can start bleeding. And so even if your, stomach problems originated with you having too little stomach acid, and then, whatever you believe as to what ended up causing a stomach ulcer, still, you kind of have to reduce your body's stomach acid production in order to let the ulcer heal. That's the basic idea. And yes, you can do a bunch of other stuff, and DGL and maybe aloe and all this other, and mastic gum and all these other alternative things. But you also want to take something to reduce that stomach acid so your stomach has a chance to heal. So if you're in that position of a medical condition, I would just do whatever the doctor recommended. However, if you're not in that position, but you still feel like you want to reduce your stomach acid because you are, fairly convinced, or at least maybe you're even just testing the theory that your issues is because you produce too much stomach acid, I would not use a PPI in that case. So again, all of these things, just to go back to what I said in the first episode, none of this is medical advice, as always. These are just, if I were in this situation of having this problem, and if a doctor said to me, would you like me to give you, I would, this is what my answer would be. So my answer would be, I'd prefer not to have an omeprazole or something, thank you. Would you mind prescribing me some famotidine instead? And so...
And why is that choice? Why are you going that way?
Well, we talked about famotidine a lot in the previous episode in the category of antihistamines, I believe. So famotidine works by blocking the H2 receptor, which I kind of teased in the last episode, so I'll explain it more here. So the H2 histamine receptor is less about allergies, and it is much more about stomach acid production. And so by being an antagonist to the H2 receptor, it reduces stomach acid production. Now, does it do it as efficiently as the PPIs? There's kind of a debate about that, but I think most of the medical establishment would say it does not, and they may be right. So again, if you're in a medical emergency situation with an ulcer or something, then just do whatever they say. But if you are just in I think, maybe I want to be able to eat spicy food sometimes, and I just think I'm that person who just produces too much stomach acid kind of situation, then famotidine may well be the thing to do because it has a lot of other benefits. First of all, if you are that person who genuinely produces too much stomach acid, and as I said, I do believe they exist, you're probably also someone who genuinely has high histamine. And so it will be beneficial to reduce that a little bit with famotidine. And as I talked about in the last episode, famotidine has a ton of other potential benefits. Two that I'll just bring up again is it's also often, not often, but sometimes used by functional medicine practitioners for mast cell activation syndrome. So this is just stopping the release of histamine from storage, usually in the, in and around the digestive tract specifically. So basically in response to things that you consume, I guess food, drinks, but also supplements, herbs, anything like that. And so it could be useful for that purpose if you also have that issue. And then it also reduces serotonin, which can often help with all kinds of digestive upsets as well as emotional upsets and all kinds of other things. And why that might be the case, again, I did a full episode on why high serotonin may not be good for you, and we did touch upon it in the last episode as well. So that's why I would personally go for famotidine. While PPI, it doesn't really have any upsides other than its mechanism that I'm aware of. So yes, it will force your body to produce less stomach acid, but there's no upside to it other than that. And there's a bunch, like with all medications, including famotidine, there's a bunch of downsides. But at least with famotidine, like aspirin and like a bunch of medications that we talked about, there are quite a few potential upsides, and that's why I would prefer that one overall. In terms of natural stuff, I do just want to give a shout out to DGL, which I think we talked about in a recent episode, so I won't do a massive thing about it, but it's a type of licorice. I love to just taste it, so I open the capsule and put it in a drink, or I do these little lozenges with xylitol and DGL. But I know about 50% of the population hates the taste of licorice, so you can just get it in a capsule and swallow it, and then you don't have to taste it. But if you don't taste it, if you just swallow it, it'll soothe the stomach, but it won't soothe the mouth, the throat, and the esophagus. So that is a bit of a choice. But it's very soothing. It's very good for helping to build up that mucus layer that is supposed to protect the stomach and basically everything. And so I'm a big fan of that as well. And if I just maybe had a little bit of reflux once and I just had a little bit of sensation in my esophagus or something like that, I might not even go for any kind of medication. I might just go for DGL. So that would also be a good one to think about. And then think about Just because some article on the internet said that something is good for you doesn't mean it is, So I'll give you an example. I remember when I first moved to Portugal back in like 2013 or something like that. I was like so impressed because, I lived in England most of my life where hardly anything grows, just like various forms of cabbage seems to be anything I ever got to grow in my garden, and apples and plums and stuff. I don't want to, but yeah, I was never able to grow that much. Whereas in Portugal, it's like everything grows so easily, and there's lemon trees everywhere. So, and I was like, oh, right. And then I read this article, oh, lemon's so great, so good for you. And people are saying, several lemons a day. And I'm like, great, I'm going to start squeezing a bunch of lemons and water and I'm drinking it. And then I'm like getting more and more of this like reflux and like, digestive discomfort and these sores in my mouth. And I'm like, I'm so stupid sometimes. I'm like, I wonder what it could be, and then like eventually I'm like, oh yeah, okay. And so, it's true for acids like lemon. It's true for like, people read about apple cider vinegar. Oh, it's a miracle. It's good for this. It's good for this. It's good for this. Yeah, quite possibly. But again, everyone's different. And so, if you really got a lot of acid, it can tip you over the edge. Now, people will argue, oh, Elwyn, but lemon is alkaline forming, or apple cider vinegar is alkaline forming, and I have to explain to them, yes. So what does alkaline forming mean? It means that when and once it has been fully processed by the body, the ultimate residue that is created is alkaline. That is true. But it's also true if you take water that's pH 7 and you squeeze 3 lemons into, I don't know, like a 200 milliliter glass and then put it in, the pH is going to go down a lot. It's going to make that liquid a lot more acidic. And what hits your stomach is not the final process of the processing of that material. It is the acidic form. It's still acidic once it hits your stomach. So what I just said, as I said, it's true for ginger, it's true for cumin, it's true for cardamom, it's true for a lot of these spicy foods, coriander. And so we just want to, and all the kind of the bitter herbs are often recommended, like gentian and I can't remember off the top of my head, golden seal, I guess. All of these kind of bitter herbs and all of these carminative herbs are supposed to support digestion. So just be aware as well that before you take anything, even a herb, that it's not the things that you're taking to try and be healthy that's causing the problem in the first place.
No, and those are really good things to look out for, especially as that understanding that, no, you're still taking in an acid. Yes, the final end product is something different. But in this meantime, yes, it's acidic. But going back to the proton pump inhibitors, like you say here, omeprazole is one of the top dispensed drugs in many countries. So it's nice that you've given a list of options with the I'm going to say it incorrectly, famotidine. How do you say that?
Yeah, you got it.
Yeah, great. And then also, too, the possibility of the DGL. Those are things to look out for. And as you also mentioned, that the problem may not be, it may be too low stomach acid, and that's where the betaine HCl can come in a process of helping an individual get better along the way. So those are really great things. Genetic Insights provides cutting-edge, affordable DNA testing, giving you access to over 500 health reports that can help you in 3 key ways. They may be able to resolve your existing health challenges even when nothing else has worked. Using simple lifestyle changes, their reports can help you reduce your risk of developing future health challenges that you may be genetically predisposed to. And they can help you feel more confident in your health by showing you where you are genetically strong. Unlike most other genetic health testing companies, Genetic Insights tests over 83 million different variations in your genes, guaranteeing 99.7% accuracy across all of their DNA reports. They cover almost every aspect of health, including digestive issues, cardiovascular health, weight loss, hormonal and blood sugar balance, as well as nutrient needs, allergies and intolerances, and so much more. Using their system is quick and easy, and reading the reports is simple. If you've done an Ancestry DNA test, you can simply download your raw DNA data, upload it to the Genetic Insights platform, and within a few hours you will have access to genetic reports which give you a risk score for each specific issue and scientifically validated recommendations based on your individual genetic profile. Everything in your reports are based on scientific studies, and there are citation links throughout every report. If you are serious about optimizing your health and wellness and feeling great, then getting access to your genetic insights reports may be the most important health investment you will ever make. In the reports, not only will you gain insights into how to overcome existing health challenges and avoid future issues, you'll also discover which types of dietary, lifestyle, and even supplement protocols are best for your unique genetics. To get your unique genetic health reports, go to geneticinsights.co and use code Rejuvenate to get 20% off today. That's geneticinsights.co using coupon code Rejuvenate to get 20% off today.
And I should mention actually that even the DGL, it's not stomach acid stimulating at all, but it is warming. So even there, like for someone who already tends to be very warm, like very hungry person, warm, high metabolism, all that kind of stuff, like maybe aloe vera would be a better thing for them. That's also soothing for the stomach, but that has more of a cooling kind of effect. So everyone's different.
Fantastic. So here we go on to our next category. These are bronchodilators and inhaled corticosteroids. So talk to us. I think I have an understanding, and maybe most people might, but just give us a little background and then into your recommendations.
Yeah, I include this because it's part of the top 10. Honestly, I do not have a good I would not use an asthma inhaler except for in the again. If a doctor told me I had to, if it was risking my life, I would. But if I had it mildly and I was offered it, it's like, give it to you if you want. I personally would not do it. My understanding, is that it's toxic. It's not really helping. But the most insidious part of it to me is that, just like we just talked about the stomach acid thing, it's not resolving the root problem, and that it's actually quite easy to resolve with something that doesn't cost any money. Is like just the simplest thing in the world, and that's basically just learning to breathe correctly. And when I say breathe correctly, I mean specifically learning to not over breathe. So this is a big discussion, and again, we should link to the full episode where I explain the whole thing. But I suppose the simplest thing to say is if I was offered these as a choice, I would say, you know what? No, I'm going to go into doing the Buteyko method practice. I'm going to take it seriously. I'm going to really do it. And so I've recommended that to a lot of people. Buteyko method is an interesting thing. It's basically about learning to breathe less by increasing your tolerance to carbon dioxide. And carbon dioxide is a bronchodilator. It is also a vasodilator. And it's also very effective at stopping all kinds of spasms, especially bronchial spasms, which are really the root usually of the problem. And so it's Buteyko method, like people who are really into it are really into it, and they often feel like it's the solution to everything. And there are studies around it doing interesting things with all kinds of health conditions. But it has a lot of studies and a lot of evidence and a lot of clinical practice support that it really is very effective for asthma and any of these kind of breathing issues like COPD as well. Even sometimes like allergic stuff and rhinitis and all those kind of things as well. So that would absolutely be what I did. I cannot offer a drug that I would do. I cannot honestly even offer an alternative, like a herb or something like I would do. I would just do this practice. And if anyone wants to share, this herb totally helps me, if I have an asthma attack and it stops me needing an inhaler, then I'd like to hear about it. But yeah, I just don't know about it. That's the thing that I know, and I don't practice it anymore. I haven't done for years. But
Well, do you have lasting results with all the practicing that you did previously? Does that just maintain?
Yeah, to some degree. I mean, not as well as if you keep doing it, honestly, but my CO2 tolerance is still good now, many years after not having done the practice. Is it as good as when I was doing the practice? No, but it is better than before. And actually, before we started recording, Chrissy, you and I were talking about why my cardio capacity is, pretty good, even though I never do any cardiovascular training at the moment. I was running last year, but I haven't really done that for a while. And yet it's pretty good, the VO2 max, all that kind of thing. And I was saying one of the things I think is because I have hot bars regularly, which is like a bit of a cardiovascular workout, and sauna or whatever would be equivalent to that. But yeah, the other thing is it is the CO2 tolerance. It's a vasodilator, which then lowers blood pressure. It means that there's more nutrients getting to every part of the body. It's like CO2 is the primary vasodilator, and it's also the primary bronchodilators, and all the other things like nitric oxide, or the nitric oxide drugs, or the nitric oxide supplements, like they sometimes have their place, but nitric oxide is kind of like an emergency backup to carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide is the primary gas that is supposed to lower our blood pressure, lower our tension in our whole cardiovascular system. And so, yeah, learning to tolerate more carbon dioxide is my number one thing.
Yeah, I mean, and well, I'll make sure that that link is there because it is definitely, I mean, breathing is key. I mean, it's a definite indication of where our mental state is. It's showing us where our health is. It's one of the indications, especially when I'm around people and just seeing if they're, just sat there and they're really out of breath. I'm like, ooh, there's something here. It's a tool to identify somebody's state of health as well. So yeah, and
100%. If you're sitting next to someone and they are straining to breathe despite sitting, that's a really bad sign. And even somebody straining to breathe while walking, or walking up the stairs, or walking briskly, it's like you should at least be able to walk briskly or walk up, say, a flight of stairs or two without being out of breath. You should still be able to hold a conversation doing it. I say you should. I'm saying if you are at a reasonable level of cardiovascular health, not optimal, not athlete, not whatever, just like reasonably healthy level of cardiovascular health.
absolutely. And, again, yeah, it's, and there's nothing like not feeling like you're able to breathe either, because I've had allergies in the past, and thank goodness through some things, or as a kid. And so just being able to feel, it's not a great place to be. So definitely love that, there is a method here. It's pretty simple, but, takes time, takes energy, focus. But yeah, you can do it at home. You can do it in the comfort of your space and improve. And it's not just for somebody that has asthma, correct?
No, it's kind of beneficial for everyone who wants to optimize. Although there is a test you can do, and it's what they call the control pause. It's a little bit difficult to do correctly yourself, but if you have someone guiding you, it's easier. But basically, it is this, probably a better way to do it for people who think that they're reasonably cardiovascular fit is just to once you're relaxed, like hold your nose, get up, and see how many steps you can take before you feel like you need some air. And if it's less than 20, that means that you're fairly intolerant to carbon dioxide. If it's less than 10, that means that you're probably already ill. You've probably already got some kind of disease or several diseases. If it's between 20 and 40, that means you're doing pretty good. If it's over 40, that means you're very good. And if it's over 60, that means you're pretty elite. And that's just until you feel I definitely need to breathe. There is also a thing where you push it to the absolute maximum, and usually that should be 2 to 3 times as much. So yeah, everything I just said, kind of multiply by 2 to 3, and I used to do it, and I used to do like 180 steps or whatever, and can I do that anymore? Absolutely not. I don't know. I haven't tested it for a while. I probably can't do more than, I don't know, 80 or something, a maximum at a push. But I do, sometimes 20 to 30, and it's just okay. But, that's like the minimum that you want. And if you can do that test and then you're fine, then it means that you probably already are exercising, and or it means that you're really very low, low stress or good resilience to stress, because it is really a lack of resilience to stress that increases your intolerance to carbon dioxide or reduces your tolerance to carbon dioxide. It's the primary factor more than anything else. But it goes both ways. If you learn to tolerate more carbon dioxide, you'll also be less stressed, because carbon dioxide is not only the primary vasodilator in the body, I would say it's also one of the primary tranquilizers in the body. When you hold your breath, you release like adrenaline and stuff. But afterwards, once your body is just saturated in more CO2, you'd be surprised just how relaxed you feel. And that's why things like the Wim Hof method work to make people feel kind of high or like really good. Generally, when people finish like something like Wim Hof method, they do not feel like, full of anxiety and all the rest, because they've held their breath for 3, 4, 5 minutes or whatever they're doing. They actually feel like often really peaceful and really like, in a serene state. And the reason is because even though they spike their adrenaline, they also spike their carbon dioxide, and the carbon dioxide is very, very calming.
Beautiful. One to check out, guys. Yeah, look at that. So we're moving on to our next category. Here we have anticoagulants and antiplatelets. So tell us about that, Owen.
Yes. We touched a bit on that in the last episode when we talked about cholesterol. Um, but we said, like, if I was told by a doctor my cholesterol's high, I probably wouldn't worry about it, although I did give my advice about what I would do and stuff. Now, that is because, so yes, like if you have a lot of cholesterol building up in your arteries, that will increase your blood pressure, and then increased blood pressure is a risk factor for cardiovascular disease, and cardiovascular disease is the number one or number two killer, depending on the country you're in. So it is a big deal, but it's also like a misunderstanding of the problem in many ways, and I touched upon some of those in the last episode. But one of the ways that it's misunderstanding the problem is, often what we're ultimately afraid of is we're afraid of like a heart attack or a stroke, right? But a heart attack or stroke is more often than not, it's actually a clot breaking off and getting stuck in one of the arteries and stopping the blood flow, as opposed to a lump of cholesterol or a lump of calcium. A lump of platelets or clotting agents is actually a lot more common. And so I think the kind of massive overemphasis on cholesterol and the massive underemphasis on platelets and fibrin, this protein that kind of binds everything together, is a mistake. We talk about that in detail in the episode I already did on cardiovascular health. But again, in a nutshell, the theory that I subscribe to is that your body isn't just building up loads of calcium or cholesterol or whatever on your arteries for fun, and then killing you. It's doing it as a protective mechanism. And my understanding is that the bloods can get all kinds of toxicity in it, especially if the liver and the kidneys are overloaded. And that toxicity can be corrosive, some of it immediately, but much more commonly over time. And so what the body does is, first of all, it tries to protect the lining of the arteries and capillaries and all the rest of it. And then second of all, it has to repair the damage. And there's often these kind of micro tears that happen. And so the protective layer is more what we're thinking about with the cholesterol, but the fixing of so a micro tear, if it were unresolved, would lead to internal bleeding. In the same way, if I cut my finger right now and I didn't clot, I would bleed to death, right? That's the hemophilia thing that the Russian royal family famously had before they were all taken out. And sorry, not all. The last line of descendants had. So it's very important that you don't carry on bleeding if you cut your finger, but it's also very important that you don't carry on bleeding if you have a tear, even a very small one, in your cardiovascular system. And so the body does the same thing in a sense of it does this clotting thing. So these platelets, these little sticky things come along and bunch together, and then they stop the hole. They plug up the hole. And then, because they are all these little individual units, the body then builds this stuff called fibrin, which is kind of like a spider web to kind of hold them all in place. Now that's fine, but the thing is, it's kind of a little bit like a scar. Like afterwards, it's still visible. Like if I cut my finger somewhere and there's like a scar and it still kind of sticks up a little bit over it. So imagine if that happens over and over again, more and more of this scar tissue, more and more of this fibrin builds up, and that's why the size of the hole in the artery, the blood vessel, can start to become less constricted because of all this fibrin and clotting material and all the rest of it building up. So anyway, there isn't really anything there isn't really a mechanism that your body has to naturally just go ahead and resolve that. And so that's where I do think that like anticoagulant and antiplatelet medications are potentially more relevant. So anticoagulant is to stop those platelets sticking together specifically. And so if I were to take a drug for this, I'll tell you that in a second, it's one we've already talked about, but I would not take a drug first and foremost. I would actually go with an enzyme like nattokinase, which we have talked about before. So nattokinase, first of all, is an antiplatelet, but it is also an anticoagulant. So it both stops it both helps to break down those platelets, and it also helps to break down this connective tissue, this fibrin that's holding them together. And so now, that doesn't mean that you have to dose it correctly, just like you have to dose the drug version correctly. You don't want that to be too much, right? And so for someone who already is, I don't know, has no history of high blood pressure, no history of arterial blockage, and doesn't need it, you wouldn't take very high dosage usually, because, you could actually create an internal bleeding problem because you're actually stopping that process happening too much. But in this day and age, most people are like, the chances of like them over having it is low, because most people have all this,
It's too much.
and
Yeah, I was going to
backlog.
say it's quite thick, or it's already quite crowded in there anyway. So
Exactly. Yeah. So nattokinase is very effective for that. Now, it depends on the dose, but that's true for drugs as well. So I would dose that kind of depending on how much I knew that I had a problem. And with women, they have to be careful with it if they're still menstruating, because it will cause more bleeding during menstruation. And that just shows you that it is like actually powerful. It works. It's one of those things that is classed as a supplement because you can just buy it as a supplement and it's not prescribed by doctors. But it's something that, like, a doctor will tell you, do not take that before surgery. I mean, they even say that about things like, omega-3 and stuff like that. They wouldn't normally warn about nattokinase just because most people, it's not very common. But if they knew you were taking nattokinase, they definitely say not to take it, right? It's very, very effective. And now the great thing about it, yeah, as I said, it doesn't just like break down those platelets and stop those platelets from congregating. It also breaks the fibrin and the other types of protein connective tissue, because then the cholesterol and the calcium and the platelets, they're all kind of bound up together by this connective tissue. So the nattokinase kind of basically helps with all of it. It helps to break down all of it. And it also is effective at breaking down other stray proteins floating around in the blood that you might not want. One example of that might be allergens, for instance. So things that maybe if you have some degree of intestinal permeability, like a leaky gut, maybe, your liver and your kidneys are overloaded, and, there's all kinds of other metabolic waste. There's all kinds of things in there. And maybe, viruses, and then maybe if you accidentally took some kind of gene modification that creates specific proteins that can cause inflammation in the body and cause problems. Nattokinase has been shown to be effective for any and all of that. So that's definitely what I would prefer. Now, having said that, if I were to go a drug version, I would go down the aspirin version, as we've already talked about. I personally don't think aspirin is as effective as nattokinase, again, at comparable doses, because, like, they can both be effective at this function, but the thing is, nattokinase does all the other cool stuff in terms of the cardiovascular system and, like, helping with detoxification, because that's really what is the root cause of the cardiovascular system issues. Aspirin is also pretty cool, but it kind of works on other different things, like reducing pain, for instance, like, we talked about in the previous episode. So it kind of depends. If I purely focused on the cardiovascular level, I prefer nattokinase. If I also wanted to, uncouple my mitochondria or reduce estrogen or all these other kind of less directly cardiovascular benefits, then I might go for aspirin instead.
okay, so again, great choices, and with little side effects, and potentially, as with the nattokinase, some more benefits beyond what it's doing as well.
Yeah, both have significant benefits beyond the kind of immediate, antiplatelet, anticoagulant action. I mean, definitely possibility of side effects. The side effects is that they work too well, right? And so that's where it has to be, dosed correctly.
Okay, perfect. Great. Another one for everybody to check out. So if you haven't, please give those a look.
And I would say, if your blood pressure is high, if you've been recommended ever one of these kind of things, then I would say that's almost a good thing, because it means you then have blessing to take these substances which are so beneficial in so many other ways. Whereas, I'm just trying to put a positive spin on it. Whereas if you have absolutely no need for any of these substances, then you kind of have to be careful and not overdo it with either of them, because you might create like internal bleeding if you did too much. It's possible. It's not. People argue about this. The risk is fairly low, but it's certainly possible. Whereas if you do have these issues, then the one benefit is you can take more of these substances which have all these other beneficial effects.
And I'm glad you mentioned that, because then my other question would be like, because most of these people, once they're prescribed something like this, then they're on it for life, right?
Yeah, and I mean, honestly, the same is true for the aspirin or the nattokinase. It's like trash keeps building up, and the city's got to keep taking it away. So the action of like a nattokinase is it's taking away the trash. That's not something that needs to stop doing unless you kill the humans that are creating the trash. So in this case, what's creating the trash is arguable, but it's toxic exposure, and it's an overwhelm of the organs that are tasked to deal with that toxicity. Maybe you could also blame the digestive tract, that it's leaking too much of the toxicity into the bloodstream. Although again, that goes to the liver first before it goes to the general circulation, so you could still go back to the liver again. So yeah, I really see cardiovascular issues more as a liver kidney toxicity issue ultimately. Now, obviously, there is a genetic component to it, and some people have more of a genetic tendency to create this reaction to that toxicity, which then ends up potentially killing you. So that's a factor as well. I'm not saying it's only toxicity, but toxicity is like the primary thing.
Right. Okay. Good. Good to know. As we're moving into our next category here, antihypertensives. So tell me, why would somebody be taking this? I think it's linked to that high blood pressure, which as we age tends to be increasing. So again, this sounds like something that once prescribed, people will be on it indefinitely.
Yeah, I mean, I think these are all top 10 most used drugs, right? And this is the third one now that's all kind of talking about the same thing. So we've really talked about statins to reduce cholesterol. We've talked about anticoagulants to stop the buildup of platelets. But yeah, the other kind of category of drugs that's very commonly used to kind of, again, hit this issue from a different angle is, okay, there's a few reasons why blood pressure would be high. Ultimately, the reason is the buildup of stuff in there, as we've already discussed. But Western medicine thinks, well, okay, and we'll give drugs for that, and we'll tackle that in our own symptom-based management way. But why don't we also give drugs that actually relax the blood vessels? And we talked about this a little bit earlier. Like when we talked about vasodilators. So it is true that with tension and stress, cortisol, adrenaline, famously, we've talked about that, it constricts the blood vessels. And so you can take drugs which lower that constriction. There are various, like beta blockers, I guess, is the most famous one that does it by working on the kind of reducing stress pathway specifically. But there's others. There's also diuretics, for instance. So diuretics works by, rather than addressing the tension of the vessel, like if it's squeezing it tight, like opening it up. The other two categories, like we talked about earlier, like removing the stuff that's in there. But another angle is like, oh, if the pressure's too high, why don't we just drain more of the fluid away? Genius, right? Less fluid, less pressure. So that's the basic theory behind diuretics. I'm sorry, if you're a biochemist and you think I'm oversimplifying this stuff, but, you can correct me in the comments if you like. But I think to some degree it is as simple as this. Yeah, it's an approach. makes sense. Okay. So literally, again, if you've just had a heart attack and you're prescribed these things, go ahead and take them. I'm not talking about that, but I'm talking about if you're in a situation where my doctor said, your blood pressure's a bit high. I can give you this if you want. That's always the situation we're talking about. And so, there are other options. Obviously, the most obvious options that I'll just address first is all the usual diet and lifestyle stuff, right? If you exercise more, if you eat better, if you eat correctly. When I say correctly as opposed to better, I mean, if you stuff your face at night just before you go to bed, even if you're not having too many calories, that's not the best way. So, or that kind of thing. So if you eat better, if you eat correctly, if you move more, if you move well, if you reduce stress, if you practice relaxation throughout the day, if you sleep better, all of these kind of things will have an impact on blood pressure. So just want to give that obvious caveat first. But I know that's all the stuff people have heard a million times before. They're probably already doing it or already have a reason they think is good enough not to do it in each case. So having said all that, let's get to the drugs. So diuretics, I think sometimes it makes sense to take diuretics for water retention. I don't really personally think it makes sense to reduce high blood pressure, although it can be effective, and again, it can be essential in a medical situation. So even though there are herbal versions of diuretics and stuff, I would not go down that avenue usually. The avenue I actually would go down first and foremost is just the electrolytes. I've been amazed how many times, I know this is anecdotal or clinical or whatever, but I have had people come along with this, that, and the other, and hypertension, and just correcting their electrolytes, specifically magnesium and potassium, kind of solves the issue. And now I know this is normal people, as in people who've never heard any of this kind of stuff. And if you're watching a podcast like this and you have this issue, maybe you're like, yeah, I've already tried all that, Owen, which is fair enough. But I'm saying that a lot of the general population, the problem is that doctors test these things and they just look for the blood levels that are normally only out of range in specific medical situations, and they're like, oh, you have enough magnesium, you have enough potassium. Even if they're out of range, a lot of the time they say, we'll just retest it. They still don't think to actually recommend you take it or start having foods or drinks that have large amounts of it to try and build it up, amazingly to me. But yeah, so both magnesium and potassium are kind of relaxing agents. I'm really oversimplifying this, but in practice, this is very often how it works. I put salt and bicarbonate on my list of electrolytes here as well, because sometimes those are also very effective at lowering blood pressure, but that's more paradoxical because, again, potassium tends to be more of an opening dilating, sodium tends to be more of a contracting, magnesium tends to be more of an opening dilating, calcium tends to be more contracting. But then again, it's a delicate balance and a delicate dance that gets quite complicated between all these things. And so I absolutely have seen cases of people where they significantly increase their salt and then their blood pressure goes down. I suspect that that's probably because the salt helps to reduce their adrenaline, and their adrenaline is what's keeping their blood pressure high by constricting the blood vessels. That's my theory. I've heard other theories, but whatever. Looking at electrolyte intake, I see this figure all the time, and I was wondering for a long time what they were basing it on. People say that 98% of people are deficient in potassium, and so it's most people are not being tested for potassium, and when they are, it's usually these doctors' ranges that see them normal. So it's where are they getting this figure from? But I realized what it is eventually. There's a certain amount that the government says that you need of each nutrient. And the point that all these people are making that say, everyone's deficient in potassium is almost no one is reaching even the government recommended amount of potassium, let alone what's optimal. So that's what they mean. When you put their diet in a chronometer or something like that, they're not meeting their 100% RDA of potassium. And a lot of people are having sodium. not a lot of people in the health community aren't often, or a lot of people who are like trying to eat a heart healthy diet aren't, but just the normal people eating normal food. Most processed food has a lot of salt in, so most people are having a lot of salt. They're not having a lot of potassium to balance it out. You can overdo it with potassium. Potassium can kill you in excess. One of the forms of capital punishment in the US, the lethal injection, is just like a large dose of potassium, which will stop your heart. And the difference between the RDA of potassium, the recommended daily allowance, and the lethal injection dose is not that big. It's less than 10 times, which is kind of crazy. So this is something that you need. And I believe the potassium is basically just because it relaxes it too much. It slows it down too much. It's literally, so that shows how powerful it is. It can literally kill you if you overdo it. And this is why there's this really bizarre thing where if you want to buy a potassium supplement, the maximum dose allowed per capsule is 99 milligrams, which is F all. It's like 1/50th of the recommended amount, which makes no sense. But then you are allowed to sell and buy like a low salt, which is a salt substitute, which is 2/3 potassium chloride and 1/3 sodium. So you're allowed to pour potassium on your food in the form of a salt substitute, but you're not allowed to put it in a pill and buy it as a supplement, except for in ridiculously tiny doses. Go figure. I don't really understand it. The point is, most people lower potassium, and potassium can lower blood pressure. Case by case. If you're restricting your sodium, it may make things worse. But if you're having a large amount of sodium, or if you're eating a normal processed diet, which by default has a large amount of sodium, then usually the issue is that people are not having enough potassium to go with it. And so I don't want to just say I would take potassium. It depends, but I would analyze my sodium to potassium intake. If, as is very common, your sodium intake is like 2 or 3 times the recommended government amount and your potassium is like half as much, that may be a clue, right? So that may be something to look into. Magnesium is similar. A lot of people in the health community, they're like avoiding dairy and then taking a bunch of magnesium. So again, in those cases, it's not necessarily going to be right. But the average person is has quite a lot of calcium between eating dairy, which a lot of people do, I guess, depending on the country, and then food additives. Often calcium carbonate and stuff is added. There is calcium in water, usually tap water, all that kind of stuff. So people usually have a high calcium to magnesium ratio in their diet. And then I've seen it again, like just adding a bit of magnesium will just bring that blood pressure right down. It can just be as simple as that in many, many cases. Another thing that I would consider is bicarbonate. And so the most common type of bicarbonate is sodium bicarbonate. But if you knew for a fact you already have enough or too much sodium, there are other forms available. There's potassium bicarbonate, magnesium bicarbonate, calcium. I don't know if it's bicarbonate, but certainly carbonate. So that's a very alkaline substance, but it is also related to carbon dioxide. And so bicarbonate can be a very effective, again, vasodilator. It can be very effective at reducing hypertension. So that's something else that I would consider. And that's something that you can just consume, or is something that you can bathe in and then you can absorb it. And that's true for everything, actually. It's also true for magnesium, potassium, sodium, everything I've talked about. So I realize it's not quite as simple as I would just take this, but I would, you've got to evaluate the diet, but look at, significant imbalances, look at significant, like I'm missing or way lower in one thing than these other things, and then seeing if just adding that back in brings that back into balance, with the primary starting places usually being magnesium and potassium. That's the one that I have anecdotes about, where just giving those to people resolve their high blood pressure. Is as simple as that. I would also talk about Buteyko. We've talked about that earlier. Again, I think it is the number one thing I would do, because I kind of already am on top of my electrolytes. So if I still got a diagnosis of hypertension, that's the first thing that I would do. Hibiscus, if you want a herbal option, is probably the number one most effective thing. It's just something you can have as a tea, or it's something that you can have as a capsule. So that's something I would do. Now, if all those things weren't working for me and I had to take a drug option, I would probably go for like a mild dose, a low dose of one of the nitric oxide boosters, like Viagra or Cialis. I know, those are famously taken for erectile dysfunction, and I've never taken them because one of the few medical issues, for some reason, I don't seem to have ever had. But I might take it just for the circulation, and that's probably because I never had an issue with circulation, right? That's, I personally have not had an issue with this. But if I had, I know there are people who I respect in the biohacking and life extension community who do swear by taking this daily every day, just like some swear by metformin, as we talked about on the last episode. And it's a controversial thing to do. I'm not saying I 100% support it or think it's a good idea. So the way that these things work is they also are vasodilators, and they do it via the nitric oxide mechanism. It's less commonly used for that purpose, but it's something that if you were to do it, a doctor would not, think you're crazy. They would understand. And in fact, I think a bunch of doctors do actually do it for this very reason, because it is a very effective vasodilator. The problem is nitric oxide is, as the name kind of suggests, I guess, like an oxidizer. So it's the opposite of an antioxidant, right? It's an oxidant, so it can create oxidative damage, medium to long term. But short term, if I wanted to bring my blood pressure down because it was, again, not medically worryingly high, but just, pre-medically worryingly high, it is something that would be effective. And there are some studies, at least, that show, some beneficial effects. And most of those effects, as I understand it, are really around just the increase in improvement of circulation, because that's, a very important factor for health. Is when you get the better your body is able to get nutrients in and wastes out of every cell, every part of your body, the better it will function overall. All other factors being equal is a significant factor. And so that's my understanding of the main reason it's beneficial. But a lot of people have an issue with that, right? This is, one of the most common things that kills people, but it's also one of the most common things that people suffer with for many decades before it kills them. And so I can see why for a lot of people, and again, there's a genetic component to it, if you have a genetic component to it, and if all the other stuff I talked about, plus other alternative stuff, is not enough, yeah, I would consider, doing something like that before I would consider any of the other, standard medical stuff.
Great. I mean, what's common, well, not common, but sort of the denominator I'm seeing, especially in these last two categories, it's like there's obviously this buildup of stuff that's going on in our system, and that these drugs, these prescriptions, are there for trying to limit it, reduce it, just so we can stay alive, essentially. So, I mean.
Well, yes. So the statins and the anticoagulants, yes, exactly. The antihypertensive, it's not reducing the buildup, it's forcing it to work despite the buildup, right? That's really what it is. So it's like, if there's that much like blood getting through, and then, now there's that much because of all the crap build up on all the sides, then it's like, oh, let's dilate it and open it so there's that much coming through again. It's kind of cheating, as it were. It's like literally not resolve the problem, not even not resolve the root problem, but not resolve the current problem of the buildup of whatever in our arteries, and just force them more open.
Yeah, so it's great to have an understanding, because sometimes, I mean, people, they just get the prescription and they're like, oh yeah, sure, take it. Okay, you've got this, but they don't understand what's actually happening in their body. So it's nice to go through this process of understanding, okay, the reason you're being prescribed this is because of this, and therefore, and then once you have the education, and again, these alternatives, potentially, there's more that you could do about it. So brilliant. Thanks, Ellen. Thank you. Right, we're going to move on to the next category, which is anxiolytics.
Yeah. So the next two I just got from the top 20, actually, because we ended up filming this before we released the previous one where I asked for suggestions. So if you did put suggestions there, put them again in this one. Maybe I'll do a part 3 at some point. But yeah, I wanted to talk about this one and the next one because I have experience with it. And I think that both of them, well, especially with this one, actually, the current prescriptions are like really not great. So anxiolytics, what does that mean? So anxiolytics means to decrease anxiety, right? So We did antidepressants last episode. It's really in that category. In terms of mental health, depression and anxiety are like the two biggest things that are recognized by the medical community and treated regularly. Obviously, there are things that are more specific, like schizophrenia or whatever, but they're much more rare. But anxiety and depression is very common. Okay, so the problem with so if I were to go to a doctor and I had in fact I've been to a doctor with anxiety, they've signed me off work. They never offered me a drug, which is nice, which is lucky. And that's probably because I'm in the UK. I'm sure if I were in other countries like the US, they likely would have done. And you know what? It's all contextual. I think maybe when I was younger and clueless, it might have actually helped me to just know what it's like to not have anxiety for once. So I'm not 100% against it, but here's the main challenge. The type of anxiolytics which are generally prescribed, which are GABA receptor agonists, things like Xanax, things like Valium. They have a few mechanisms of action, but primarily they're GABA agonists. So GABA, or gamma aminobutyric acid, is the primary calming neurotransmitter, or sedating even neurotransmitter in the body. And so it is true, and it is amazing. If you've ever been in the grip of intense anxiety or a panic attack or anything like that, like if you take one of these substances, it's like it just all melts away. It is quite incredible, because when you have an experience like that, you're so caught up in it, and then like it feels so real, and then it's like all disappears. Now, if you've never taken one of these, actually, I don't think I have taken any of the prescription ones, but I've had kind of analogs which were similar. Most of us can relate to this on a kind of slightly less extreme level of alcohol, right? This is why alcohol is one of the most used and abused drugs in the world. Alcohol has a few different mechanisms of action. It's not as specific as Xanax, but I think the primary reason that people use it is, again, because it is a GABA agonist. What does that mean? It relaxes you, and it's not necessarily as obviously sedating. But why do people drink? Oh, it's because it helps me relax. It helps me have fun. It helps me to take it easy. It helps me to forget. It helps me to. I don't know if people say this, but it's like to reduce the voice of should in their head, right? You should be doing this. You shouldn't be doing that. Referred to as in Freudian psychology as the superego, and it's due to the action of the prefrontal cortex. And GABA just quiets that pass down. Oh, social inhibition, that's the phrase that I was struggling for, right? It makes me feel less nervous or even relaxed around other people, new people. A lot of people, especially younger people who want to go out and meet new people, the only way they can do it often is to drink alcohol, because it helps to quiet that fear and also that should voice enough. And so raising GABA is a very tempting thing to do for many people. And the downside of just raising pure GABA is, like, as I said, like Valium is, famously, these are so sedative that they'll just kind of put you to sleep. But so that's why alcohol kind of also raises dopamine, so it gives you some energy. And then, famously, people like to take alcohol often with some kind of stimulant. Cigarettes were more the thing in the past. Maybe these days it's, other stuff, whatever. But anyway, so the challenge with all GABA drugs, including the prescription ones, is that they are down-regulating and habit-forming. So meaning the body is always trying to keep you alive, is always trying to optimize you, and there are some neurotransmitters, hormones, neurochemicals that your body is kind of happy to have high, and like oxytocin, famously, the bonding or love molecule, the more you stimulate it, the more that your body then stimulates more. It's like it's an upregulating neurochemical. But there are some, like dopamine and GABA, which are down-regulating. Your body really doesn't want too much of them. It kind of makes sense. It doesn't want too much dopamine, because dopamine is the motivational chemical, and throughout most of our evolution, there was a scarcity of resources. So it doesn't want you in a highly energized, highly motivated state all the time, because that's a very energy consuming state. But also because throughout most of our evolution we had scarce resources, it also doesn't want you in a sedated state. It wants you out there doing stuff, trying to survive, reproduce, and whatever. So so maybe that's my explanation as to why it's so downregulating, but the bottom line is it is. So what that means is, if you do something to raise your GABA, your body doesn't go, okay, great, I'll just make more, like with oxytocin. It goes, I don't want you to have more. This is potentially dangerous to your survival. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to reduce the amount of receptors for GABA. I'm going to reduce the sensitivity of the receptors to GABA, and I'm going to reduce your own production of GABA, and some combination of those three, depending on the specific situation. So if you have anxiety and you take one of these drugs for the first time, it's even true of alcohol, but certainly any of the prescription ones, which is really what we're talking about. First time you have it, you feel fantastic, like, oh my god, if you've had anxiety for a long time, I've never felt so at peace, never felt so relaxed. This is amazing. Maybe you're happy you can sleep, maybe you're happy you can talk to people with anxiety, whatever it might be. And then the thing is, the next day or whenever it wears off, it's all back again, and it's a bit worse than before. And then you kind of feel tempted to take it, first of all, because you had such a good time, but second of all, because you actually feel a bit worse. And then you do that again and again and again. And then eventually you end up in a position where you no longer feel so incredibly wonderfully tranquil and serene and peaceful when you take it. You feel horrifically anxious and unbearably anxious unless you take it. So this is the same pattern of addiction with alcohol. Like, generally the things that are hardest to stop taking drugs in terms of the severity of the withdrawal, like in a more everyday sense, is alcohol and heroin, right? So it's the opiates, but alcohol's in that GABA agonist category, and barbiturates and these anxiety medications are really in that category. They're extremely hard to get off because the intense level of fear and anxiety and unease you feel when you try and stop taking them. Jordan Peterson, famous 21st century philosopher who built a whole movement of people who were really looking up to him, and then he ended up taking it. They were prescribed by a doctor. I guess for whatever you think of him, he's someone who still does things because the doctor recommends them, and ended up with this horrific addiction, and had to go to some clinic, I think in Russia or something, to try and detoxify from it, because amazingly in the US they at least, him and his family, felt there was nowhere that was able to even address it and deal with it. And it's like a cautionary tale, because there were millions of people who were looking up to this guy, thinking he was full of wisdom, rightly or wrongly, and yet he got caught in this trap. And that's kind of specifically the medications, but of course with alcohol I could do a huge list of all the people who fall into that trap, who otherwise we might think are wise and enlightened and smart and all the rest of it. So but what I'm saying is, this is not something that only idiots get involved in. This is something that some of the most considered impressive and respected and whatever people out there can fall into this trap of. And it's especially if, obviously anxiety can happen to anyone, but especially if you're out there, if you're a public figure, if you've got millions of people who love you and or hate you, and you're traveling the world and talking in front of big crowds and all the rest of it. And I'm not just talking about philosophers, musicians and celebrities, like anyone, like all of this kind of stuff. It's like, it's an intense amount of pressure, and so it's so tempting to take something to like calm that anxiety, and it's a very difficult trap to get out of. So I maybe spent too long describing that, but I guess the bottom line of it is, this is why I would not take these drugs from
No,
a doctor.
but I'm so glad that you did spend time talking about it, because it's important for people to understand that down regulating aspect. And then they can be like, oh, they can understand, right, this is only supposed to be for a short period of time. It's not, as I'm increasing, these are the aspects and the mechanism that my body is going to do, so that you understand it's not a fix, and you could potentially end up in a worse position than you were before you started.
Yep. And people might say, oh, it's easy for you to say, oh, when you haven't been in the position of extreme anxiety, you don't know what it's like. Not true. I've admitted there's a bunch of things here that I've not faced and not had to deal with. But this isn't one of them. I've been in intense anxiety. I think you were around at one point when I had it, Chrissy. And the anxiety was creating the pain, and then the pain was creating the anxiety, and it was a vicious circle. And I remember I had Xanax. Some doctor had prescribed me a couple of years before. And I just did not take it. Like, no matter how bad it is, I've not gone down this particular road just because of how pernicious it is. So that's my personal stand on it. And also because of anxiety, as crippling and unpleasant as it is, unlike, a stomach ulcer, it won't kill you. Like, you might, do something as a result of it that's not good, but it's, in the end, it's something that you can, it's a feeling. I guess that's what I'm saying. There's a real biochemical basis for it, but I don't think it's justified to do something as dangerous as that. That's my personal position. And I especially don't feel that way when there are alternatives that are not as strong as, a strong dose of like a barbiturate or something like that. But to me, they're like good enough. They may take you from a 10 panic to an 8 or a 6 as opposed to a 0, like a strong dose of, a barbiturate you're not used to, but they're still good enough to like get you out of that absolutely intense panic, and then you can, work on it with more, whatever else, lifestyle and addressing the underlying causes and stuff like that. So I give you a list of a few things. I remember, back when I was having a lot of these kind of anxiety attacks, and I would like get all worried, like I'd be in a real hypochondriac mode, and I'd be like, oh my God, my heart's racing. This is quite common. People, they become aware of their heart and like it's racing. So, oh my God, I'm dying, all this kind of crazy stuff. And I'd monitor my heart rate. And I'm like, oh wow, that's 100. That's not good, And then I'd try and do a lot of the practices that are recommended, meditation or exercise or whatever. And then I'd measure my heart rate after, and I was like, still 100, like it didn't really work, didn't have an impact. So then I became kind of, and by the way, just to clarify, I've had anxiety before and my heart rate was like high 40s. So I'm not saying that anxiety always goes with a high heart rate, and I've had clients where they have actually a really low heart rate and high anxiety. But I'm just saying in this particular instance, my heart rate was really high. So I was like, okay, what actually lowers it? And I came up with a list of few things that did actually work. Number one was CBD. I've talked about this recently in another interview. Not THC. THC absolutely can increase anxiety. Definitely can increase heart rate. I realize it's case by case. I realize a lot of people use cannabis as well. I've talked a lot about alcohol, but I realize a lot of people use cannabis. But I don't think it's really reducing anxiety when it's primarily THC over CBD. I just think it's putting you, well, it's stimulating endocannabinoids, right? It just works by a different system. It's kind of sidestepping the issue. Let's just put it that way. So I think one of the things that endocannabinoids do, or exocannabinoids, is they make you take yourself and life less seriously. Yeah, but obviously, famously as well, with cannabis use, people can become paranoid, which is obviously a sign of higher anxiety. So very risky for that purpose. But CBD itself, I find very effective for anxiety. I told the heart rate story to say I remember like all these practices and all these things didn't work, and then I'd take some CBD and then my heart rate would go down like 20, 30 points. Like it really did just like calm me down significantly. And again, it's doing it through not as much the GABA mechanism, but so with CBD, it's kind of a little bit dissociative as well. So it's not kind of resolving anything, but I found the effect to be quite long lasting, and probably because it's not working in the GABA system, it did, I wasn't more anxious when it wore off. In fact, maybe even less still. So I kind of like that aspect of it. Another thing which people might be surprised to hear, which I got from Dr. Ben something, can't remember his name, but he wrote a book called Dirty Genes, Genes. Anyway, Ben Lynch, I think. He talked about using lithium for anxiety. And so lithium's interesting. Lithium is sold as a medication sometimes to usually bipolar people specifically, but it's sold at massive dosages. Like the usual bipolar person's on like 500 milligrams to 1,000 milligram, and it does work. It really evens out those extremes of mood, but it's also really suppresses the thyroid, could cause kidney damage, all this kind of stuff. And it leaves people on those kind of doses leaving very flat. And that's why a lot of people with bipolar, they actually stop taking it because part of them likes those ups and downs, or at least it prefers it to the intense flatness of emotion that dose of lithium can create. But this is a case of, and I think I said this quote for myself in the previous episode, where medications tend to be overdosed and supplements tend to be underdosed. Well, then when it comes to lithium, it's also sold as a supplement, sometimes in 1 milligram dose and sometimes in 5 milligram dose. I have found, and I'm not the only one, again, it's anecdotal, clinical, but that people around me have also found that a more moderate dose, like 5 to 10 milligrams, really takes the edge off an anxiety attack. Like, it really is significantly helpful. No, it's not going to be as powerful as a capsule of Xanax to someone who's not used to taking Xanax. I'm not claiming that, but again, it can take you from a 10 to maybe a 6 to 8, or it can take you from 8 to 5 to 7, something like that. Like, it can bring you down, and it can bring you down enough that you can start to be more rational and reasonable and think clearly and start to do some other stuff, more practical stuff. Because a lot of the time anxiety is unreasonable, but a lot of the time it has some valid basis, right? Like, people are worried and I'm broke, or I can't trust this person, or I hate my life, or whatever. And there's some validity to those things potentially, that they're not worth the level of anxiety that they're feeling. So it can just help you kind of get it down. And that's part of the other, I'd say, deeper issue with a very powerful anti-GABA, even without all the medical problems I talked about earlier, is that it just makes you ignore the valid reasons for fear that you may have in your life. I know Joe Rogan talks about this. He's a lover of cannabis and THC, which I'm not. And, he talks about the side effect that people have of paranoia and anxiety and stuff like that, fearful thoughts. And he says, I embrace them when I get them, because I think they're good, because they're telling me the things that I need to know that, maybe of concern. So that's interesting. And I guess, he's a bit of a warrior type, and it's an interesting warrior type mentality to take to anxiety. But I believe I wouldn't use cannabis for that purpose personally, but maybe if I was him, I would. But I do think there is a grain of truth to it that, completely suppressing anxiety, often there is a basis. Now, when you're in a full grip of anxiety, you're absolutely overblowing it in almost every case. You're acting like it's the end of the world. It may just be, an issue of some size. But nonetheless, there may be some truth to it as well. So that's why, again, I think maybe the goal should be to take your anxiety from a 10 to a 5 rather than 10 to a 0, because then you can, it gives you enough enough rationality to address it reasonably, but also enough motivation to address it. Because if you're at a 0, you've got no motivation to actually deal with it. So that's, another reason I think it's good to just bring it down a bit. Anyway, so lithium can be good. 1 milligram works on some people, but 5 to 20 usually is more likely to be effective. And I wouldn't have a dose as high as 20 every day, but that's something you can take as needed. And I would definitely have it in the supplement cupboard as needed, especially if you have a tendency for anxiety. I didn't add it to this list, but actually thinking about it, based on episodes we've done recently, I am seeing the correlation between copper and anxiety over and over again. So another thing you could it may or may not be effective, but like one dose of say 500 milligrams to 1,000 milligrams of molybdenum is shown to be perfectly safe, even if it's not part of a greater protocol, if it's one-off, right? So it's something that you could just test. If you're in the group of anxiety, you could test half a milligram to 1 milligram of molybdenum, and if it works, then that gives a good indicator that high copper may be a root cause of your anxiety. Theanine is something we've talked about before in the supplement space. Again, massively underdosed. Like the usual 1 to 200 milligrams of theanine on its own, if you're having an anxiety attack, is probably going to do nothing. But if you have 1 or 2 grams, so like 10 times as much, I have not seen anything that shows that there's any problem with that. I personally have used it, like definitely 1 gram, no issue whatsoever. So that could be something to consider, to try. Very safe, very low side effect profile. Not like a direct GABA agonist, so no withdrawal, no like after effect that I've ever observed. And then, Imodin is something we talked about recently in the supplement episode. That's like a powerful cortisol blocker. But yeah, I'll just get to the drug version. So if I were to do a drug, the one I would do, you could ask your doctor for it, but I don't think they give it to you. It would be Phenibut. So Phenibut is usually something that's sold in like nootropic kind of online stores. It's case by case. Some countries it's illegal, some countries it's not. In the UK, I know it's certainly not. You can buy it as a supplement and it's legal. It is kind of in between like a theanine and a Xanax. It is definitely stronger than any kind of herbal supplement thing that I've talked about, but it is not as strong as a Xanax. But it is because it is a significantly effective GABA agonist. It does have the risk of addiction. It does have the risk of withdrawal, but the side effect profile to me is a lot better. I know some people in the kind of biohacking space who use it recreationally. So we talked earlier, one of the reasons people use anti-anxiety is just to, cope with life. But another reason people use it is socially, right? They use it because they're going to a party or, whatever, and they have some social anxiety, or maybe they don't have social anxiety, but they just want to be as relaxed and fun as possible. And so they use it as like an alternative to alcohol. And so I think both use cases. So an occasional thing to just cut, a spike of anxiety, or an occasional going to a party or something like that, I would use something like Phenibut, definitely over alcohol or like a barbiturate. I would use it over a barbiturate, as I said, less powerful, less risk of withdrawal and all the rest of it. But I would use it over alcohol because I think it has depending on who's taking it, the reports are like it's either the same or better than alcohol for like helping you to relax and enjoy a social occasion. But it doesn't have a lot of the bad effects of alcohol, right? It's not poisoning your liver. It's not building up aldehydes. It's not doing a bunch of other stuff. Some people, when they drink alcohol, they become really depressed or really angry or rageful and stuff like that. You don't have that with Phenibut. So overall, to me, it's like I prefer not to do any of that. But if I was like, right, I'm in a party mood or whatever, I'm going to take drugs mood, I'll be like, I'll take Phenibut, not alcohol, because its side effect and effect profile is so much better.
In an ideal world, you'd meet all of your nutritional needs in the form of vitamins, minerals, phytonutrients, and more from the foods you eat. However, unless you prepare all of your food at home from scratch using the highest quality ingredients possible, the reality is that most of us need some nutritional support. Most of us need to take supplements if we want to look, feel, and perform at our best on a consistent daily basis. And this is especially true if you have genes that give you an elevated need of certain nutrients. And this is where Feel Younger can help. What I love about Feel Younger is that they offer a huge range of quality supplements and healthcare products formulated and endorsed by Owen Robinson, including must-haves like magnesium glycinate and vitamins B12, D3, and K2. And they do it at affordable prices with free shipping for orders over $50 without ever compromising on quality, purity, or potency. To learn more about how Feel Younger supplements can give your health a boost while supporting this podcast, please visit feelyounger.net and use promo code Rejuvenate to get 20% off your first order. That's promo code Rejuvenate for 20% off your first order at feelyounger.net. With alcohol, I mean, I know it doesn't necessarily spike your blood sugar, but there's a lot of sugar content. There's a lot of all of that, especially with insulin resistance, things like that too. So not only is your liver having to process it, but then your body's having to deal with that as well.
Very good point. Thank you. Yeah, I mean, obviously, like regular significant alcohol intake is one of the biggest risk factors for like insulin resistance and type 2 diabetes. Absolutely. It's not well, it's a fermented carbohydrate. It's 7 calories per gram. It's actually its own fourth calorie source after protein, fats, and carbohydrates. Um, but yeah, you're right. It's not only poisoning the liver, it's really stressing the pancreas.
Right. Okay. So those are some really good things to look at for those anxiolytics. I like how you said that, just having some of that lithium in your cupboard, in your medicine cabinet, could potentially really help a panic attack, anxiety attack, things like that. So yeah, great, great, great. I know in the past I've tried the theanine, especially for sleep and things like that, and that's been very, very helpful and effective as well.
Excellent.
Yeah. So our final category for this episode today, here we go, guys. Laxatives. Come on, Ellen, talk to us about this.
Yeah. So yeah, it's actually very common medication. I was slightly surprised to see. Not, I think it is a very common problem, and it's a significant problem. It may seem a bit light compared to a lot of things that we've talked about, but the impact this can have on your mood, first of all, can be really, really significant if you're constipated. And of course, although there are technically other bigger toxin exit pathways, like the skin, in terms of like the worst toxins usually have to be processed by the liver, and they usually have to be excreted primarily through the intestines. And so the slower that goes, the more of that bad stuff gets reabsorbed, all the other things being equal. We don't want it to be too quick either, obviously, because that means not enough nutrients are being absorbed. But still, being constipated is no good. It kind of ruins your mood, it ruins your energy levels, and it can obviously long term lead to some significant, even life threatening challenges, not directly but indirectly. So it is a big deal to go regularly. I know that like medical opinion, alternative opinion is really split on this, like with so many things we've talked about, like with stomach acid. I think most alternative practitioners think that several times a day or like once every meal is optimal. From what I've seen, a lot of medical practitioners don't feel that way at all, and they feel like a couple of times a week is just fine, and that all these people trying to defecate regularly are just like weird anal, Freudian kind of obsessives kind of thing. So there's a huge split there, but in the end, you can go by how you feel, and some people feel fine, say going once a day, in which case great. But a lot of people don't, and they feel better when they go more. And so that is why laxatives are in that top 20 of most used drugs. So the most common types that are out there are like these fiber kind of things I've seen. I have never found those to be effective at all. You're shaking your head, not you, Chrissy.
Yeah, no.
I guess they work for someone because it's a big, multi-billion-dollar industry. But I wonder if they've tried some of the other alternatives that I'm going to talk about today, because I'm actually surprised at how poor they are. And then the other more significant laxatives, like, for instance, the stuff they'll give you before a colonoscopy or something like that, are not the end of the world. If you have to do it, you have to do it, but pretty toxic. So I just wanted to give some, again, like, and I guess I have been in this position, like, I've been in a position before, like abdominal pain, and then they thought I had appendicitis, and then in the end they were like, no, you're just constipated. I remember that from quite a long time ago, many years ago, but still. So I have been in that position, and they're like, would you like me to give you something for this? And so what would I say? Well, so first of all, root causes, very complicated constipation. We've kind of done several episodes talking about the digestive system, but really, really obvious ones to consider are you drinking enough water? Like, it could be just literally you're just too dried out. I know you can also drink too much water, but again, I'm surprised when I see some clients and they're so sophisticated in so many different ways, and yet when I check about their water intake, it's like it's very inadequate. Like, and when I say water, I guess I mean liquids. So yeah, so that's one thing just to check. Could that be it? And another just to check thing that is not as obvious to a lot of people is exercise, movement. If you are sitting all day, it is not surprising if you don't go often. Like you need movement to get the lymph moving and get peristalsis going. So that can be another thing. I'm not talking about, heavy sweating at the gym, but like walking a total of an hour a day. And yes, that includes, it doesn't have to be an activity in its own right. That could just be walking around the house or walking around the office or whatever. You can measure it one of those step meters. And in fact, it's true that like walking a little bit throughout the day is actually better than say sitting for 12 hours and then walking for an hour. Like, so walking around, um, and really I'm saying an hour, but honestly, people who move like over 3 to 4 hours a day, and when I say move, I think like just standing behind a cash register or whatever, like jobs like that I used to have, that's not quite enough either. But if you're like moving around, picking stuff up, putting stuff down, like, I don't know, I remember when I did a little bit of house moving, for instance, or painting, like you're doing this and you're doing this, and like all this kind of movement, like real
Dynamic movements, like you're really engaging more of your being. And
yeah,
yeah.
yeah, not just standing around or doing, like working on an assembly line, just doing this all day. Oh, you did that. That's not quite enough. But yeah, like really moving. Like if you do that several hours a day, it's very difficult to be constipated unless you have some other major thing that you're omitting, like drinking enough water or something like that. So movement is significant. But again, I know that's not what this episode's about. This episode's about drugs and drugs alternatives. So, all right. If the doctor offered me something, the first thing I would do is just try a big dose of magnesium. Most effective, magnesium chloride, also magnesium sulfate, often referred to as Epsom salts. Magnesium chloride is often referred to just as like magnesium flakes or whatever. And this is something very cheap. You can normally get it like for a few dollars per kilo. This is not an expensive thing at all. You can put it in water, and dosage varies widely, but you find the right dosage and there will be an amount that will cause you to go to the toilet. For some people, it's a lot. For some people, it's like several tablespoons, and it depends on the situation as well. For some people, it's half a teaspoon will get them running to the toilet, several times for the next few hours. It varies widely. Sometimes oxide is more effective or a better idea. And some people prefer citrate. And these are all extremely cheap. They're all the cheapest forms of magnesium, easy to get. You can get them as powder, you can get them as capsules. So that would be my starting place. Cascara is good as well, Cascara sagrada. And the active ingredient in there is emodin, which I mentioned before, I think in this episode, for something. Oh, yeah, for anxiety. So it is an effective cortisol blocker, but it is also an effective peristalsis initiator. So cascara is a herb to try. And the subject of herbs, I'll just say coffee. I'm not a fan personally, I don't use it. But I know the majority of the population does. And it's something that I think one of the main reasons that people use it so much, I mean, obviously people use a lot of coffee for energy, for stimulant impact, but you can get that from energy drinks, you can get it from tea or green tea. A lot of the reason people really love the coffee is the laxative effect that it has. This is actually true of all bitter herbs though. Inodin's kind of that category, but like dandelion root, for instance, or any kind of bitter herbs, any kind of liver bile stimulating herbs, like gentian, for instance, they'll all have that impact to some degree, certainly if they're used at equivalent doses to coffee. So it's something to consider as well. And then like under probably mentioned in this category, but beetroot I think is really powerful. I think with all these things, including magnesium, if you use them every day, they start to become not effective. And that's so if you have beetroot every day, you probably like what you're talking about, although it might still be having an effect that you don't realize until you stop eating it every day. But certainly if you don't often have beetroot, it can work. Famously, prunes, prune juice is something that's recommended, can work for a lot of people. I would say actually acidic fruits in general. I've never met a constipated fruitarian. So once you eat a lot of fruit, and I'm not saying you should, it's case by case, but if you can, if that suits you, if that works for you, and I say more the acidic fruit, like your bananas, for instance, are probably the least, laxative effects that I'm aware of. In fact, I remember it was in Bali, it's common there for people to get diarrhea. And their remedy for that was just to eat like several bananas, because the idea is it binds it up. And I think it's case by case. It depends on people's microbiome as to how much it is anti-laxative. But anyway, it wouldn't be my first choice as a laxative when I talk about fruits. I am talking more about acidic fruits, like definitely berries and pineapples and I don't know, apples, even any of these kind of fruits that have a sour taste. There's something about, this is something I learned from the person who taught me colonic hydrotherapy. There's something about the acids in fruit that just really seem to stimulate things and get things moving. I would say more than vegetables. I don't think it's the fiber. I think if you look it up on Google or AI, it'll just tell you it's the fiber. I don't believe it's the case. I believe it's the acids. But again, if you have tendency for really high stomach acid, lemon juice, I guess that's the ultimate high acid fruit. That again, a lot of people swear by that. A bit of glass of warm water in the morning with half a lemon squeeze in there will get them to go to the toilet. Same principle. That's why, again, I really don't think it's the fiber. I think it's the acids in the fruit that really get you going. So these are different things, beetroots, some people might not want them because of the oxalates. Fruits, some people may not want them because of the sugar or the fructose or whatever, but these are potentially options for you. Strong greens as well. Again, some people may not want them for various reasons, but like a wheatgrass juice or like juiced anything that's like a green leaf. I don't know, Swiss chard or whatever, anything like that will tend to have a laxative effect as well. So all of those are things that you can consider. Now, if I was hardcore constipated and none of those things were really, doing it for me, and the doctor offered me something, rather than one of those, as I said, I think fiber things is normally like default things, I would say, please can I have some linaclotide? Brand name for that is, in the UK anyway, it's called Constella. This is something that was prescribed to me once for this purpose. It might have been that incident I mentioned. And honestly, I think I've used less than 2 capsules ever in total. Like it's so effective that I've never taken a capsule. What I do is I open the capsule, I put a tiny, tiny little bit of powder on like something, and I'll just lick that powder, and then it'll be like, whoosh, like go. And I can't remember I should have written it down, but the exact mechanism, but it's basically turns on the peristalsis thing very strongly. It's not serotonergic. I can't remember. It's something else. And I looked into it. Side effect profile, basically fine. I remember running it by Dr. Miriam. She said, yeah, it's basically, it's not a big deal. Not something I'd have as a full capsule every day, because I think it's hitting that receptor too much and it will be down-regulating, just like we talked about a few minutes ago with the GABA thing. But if you have some really bad constipation and, even all the usual stuff, all the stuff I've taken about is just not working, and you just need to break that down once or occasionally, then something like linaclotide is probably what I would do as opposed to any other medication.
Great. Yeah, because constipation, you hear about it's pretty pervasive, and as we've discussed, with toxins being one of the biggest detriments to our health, being constipated is only going to compound that, because we do need to let everything go. We just need to make sure that those pathways are open. So these are some great alternatives and also recommendations, Ellen. So thank you.
Thank you. Toxins, and I'll just mention dysbiosis. So the longer the food stays in there and doesn't get broken down and move through, and it basically has a chance to ferment and rot, the more it feeds the dysbiosis, the pathogenic material, it feeds too many of the commensal, which then become pathogenic. And then when you have that infection, they're often quite difficult and stubborn and difficult to get rid of, as we talked about in the previous episode. So absolutely, toxins, but I should mention that one as well, the dysbiosis element.
No, that's a really good point. Really good point. Well, this has been, I've really enjoyed these last 2 episodes that we've done, these medications and your recommendations, because there was a lot I didn't know about before. So I really appreciate that, in insights and education. So everyone, yes, before we close, Elwyn, what would you like to say to all of our lovely listeners that have joined us today?
Thank you. I appreciate your time. If you're still listening right at the end here, then I know that you are a true supporter of the show. And so I would just ask you if you could support the show further by liking, commenting, especially sharing, sharing with people who you think would be open to it and who would appreciate it, or sharing it on social media or in forums or in Facebook groups or any of that kind of stuff. I see you guys doing it. I really appreciate it. Keep at it. And then also, if you would be so good as to support us by supporting any of our sponsors, or by if you're on YouTube, there's a way you can click, I think, the join button, and there's a very minimal monthly donation. Then we would really appreciate it as well. Thank you.
Definitely. And if you guys have any other, medications or things, as Owen said before, that you want us to dive into or give you alternatives for, please make sure you leave it in the comments below, and we'll hopefully bring that episode to you. So as always, thank you for your time, and we'll see you again.
Hey, I hope you enjoyed that video. You may have noticed I recommended a few different videos in that episode, and one of the ones I recommend is just here, if you want to click there, or another one I recommend is just below, if you want to click on that one and watch that next.